Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today we finish World War II, and that's all there is to it. I don't need to introduce anymore. We know what's going on. Hopefully you've figured some things out about the end of World War II. There we go. All right, Module 11, Lesson 7, the end of World War II. That was your warm-up. Objectives, we're going to describe the end of the war in Europe, explain both the development of the atomic bomb and the debates about its use, identify the challenges faced by the Allies in building a just and lasting peace, summarize the economic and social changes that reshaped American life during World War II. All right, so the end. In Europe, the Battle of the Bulge left Germany severely weakened. The Allies pressed eastward into the German heartland. The Soviets pushed west across Poland. Remember, the Soviets were the first to come upon the Nazi death camps, and as they approached Majdanek, SS guards worked vigorously to destroy the evidence of their heinous crimes, but they ran out of time. When the Soviets entered, they found 1,000 starving prisoners alive, the world's largest crematorium, and a storehouse containing 800,000 shoes. Why? I don't know. Americans who helped liberate camps in Germany were equally as horrified. As the Soviet army approached Germany from the east, the Allied forces were preparing to cross the Rhine River, the last major physical obstacle into Germany. Hitler ordered all soldiers to destroy bridges across the river and to hold defensive positions there. American forces were able to capture a railroad bridge over the Rhine, March 1945. And after that, Allied forces poured into Germany, surrounding the Germans. Over 250,000 German soldiers were captured, 10,000 were killed. With the Rhine crossed, there was little to stop the Allies' advances through Germany. Allied planes roamed the skies, freely hitting military targets, while Allied troops pushed through Berlin from both sides, hoping to end the war once and for all. So here are some Soviets freeing concentration camp prisoners. And here's the map of the enclosure of Germany. All right, Yalta. So January 1945, FDR took another presidential oath for office for the fourth time. He ran in 1944, believing he needed to see the nation through a victory, and a majority of Americans agreed. So he gets reelected 4 times. Never happened. Ever. Won't ever happen again. February 1945, an ailing FDR met with Churchill and Stalin at a Black Sea resort in the city of Yalta in the Soviet Union. For 8 days, the 3 leaders discussed the fate of Germany and the post-war world. Stalin's country had been devastated by the Germans and favored a harsh approach that saw Germany divided into occupation zones, so Germany again would never threaten the Soviet Union. Churchill disagreed, but FDR acted as a mediator between the two and was prepared to make concessions to Stalin for 2 reasons. One, FDR hoped the Soviet Union would stand by its commitments to join the war against Japan when they were still fighting Japan in the Pacific. Stalin had refused to send troops thus far, and it had caused some tension. The second reason was FDR was waiting for Stalin's support for a new world peacekeeping organization to be named the United Nations, because the League of Nations sucked. The conference produced a series of compromises. So all these are test questions. To pacify Stalin, FDR convinced Churchill to agree to a temporary division of Germany into 4 zones: British, French, American, and Soviet. Churchill and FDR assumed that in all the zones we brought together to reunite Germany in the future. Stalin would promise, quote, free and unfettered elections in Poland and other Soviet-occupied Eastern European countries. Stalin would agree to join the war against Japan. All 3 leaders that hoped that Soviet participation would hasten the war's end. And Stalin agreed to participate in the international conference in April in San Francisco, SF San Francisco, for the creation of the United Nations, the UN. So this is Yalta. And you can kind of tell FDR is not looking very FDR-ish, even if it is doctored and colored. All right, victory in Europe. April 25th, the Soviets stormed Berlin in his underground bunker. As the story goes, Hitler prepared for the end. April 29th, he married his longtime friend, Eva Braun. That same day, he sent out his last message, blaming the Jews for starting the war and his generals for losing it. Hitler shoots himself while his wife took poison. Under his orders, the bodies were burned afterwards. 1 week later, General Eisenhower accepted the unconditional surrender of the Third Reich. May 8th, 1945, test question, the Allies proclaimed VE Day, otherwise known as Victory in Europe Day. However, President Roosevelt did not live long enough to see VE Day. April 12th, the president suffered a stroke and died. That same night, Vice President Harry S. Truman, say that 5 times fast, became the next president. Truman was a former senator from Missouri and was picked as FDR's running mate and only served as his VP for a few months before FDR died. Truman hadn't been included in the top policy decisions and was unaware of the development of the atomic bomb. Many Americans doubted his ability, but Truman was honest and willing to make the tough decisions, and those are qualities he would desperately need during his presidency. So there's this TV show called Hunting Hitler that showcases the peculiar sus end of Hitler's life. If you watched it, you can check out this link. Look up Hunting Hitler on YouTube. All right, there's newspapers saying Hitler dead. It's VE Day. Remember Pearl Harbor. There's Churchill and I believe the King and Queen. And a sad looking FDR. And this is Harry Truman taking the oath of office. All right, top secret. So after Okinawa and Iwo Jima in the Pacific, Allied leaders prepared for an invasion of Japan. They also knew that such an invasion would be a desperate struggle. Japan had a large army and would defend every inch of their homeland. See those two battles up above. So General Leslie Groves led the Manhattan Project with research that can be completed by J. Robert Oppenheimer. Test question, know his name, J. Robert Oppenheimer. The development of the atomic bomb was the most ambitious scientific enterprise, costing more than $2 billion. More than 600,000 Americans took part in the manufacture and assembly of the atomic bomb. Despite the number of people working on the construction of it, the Manhattan Project was the best kept secret of the war. Few workers knew of its ultimate purpose, as the government and military took precaution to keep, not to jeep, to keep news of the bomb's developments secret. And the first test of the new bomb took place July 16, 1945, near Alamogordo, New Mexico. There was a blinding flash 180 miles away and would be followed by a deafening roar as a tremendous shockwave rolled through the trembling desert. This is J. Robert Oppenheimer. When you Google atomic bomb scientists, these people come up. So there were different places where, as I've discussed before, the Manhattan Project that was built all over the country, thinking it's in Manhattan, which is New York over here, Manhattan Island, wasn't the case. And that's why. It was the best kept secret. All right, test question. You need to know this slide. Yeah. So the age-old question, the question of the century. President Truman now faced a difficult decision whether the Allies should use the bomb or bring an end to the war. Many advisors to the president suggested its use as a means to end the war and to save American lives. Some scientists agreed, even more so after the casualty figures from Iwo Jima and Okinawa were reported. Diplomatic and political considerations were taken into consideration again, as tension and distrust were mounting between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union. Remember Yalta? After the test at Alamogordo, some advisors agreed that the Soviet entry into the war should be reconsidered. So, as a result of the bomb, The Soviet entry into the war seemed unnecessary as it could prevent their influence in East Asia after the war. So let's not have Stalin invade. Additionally, American officials believed that a successful use of the bomb would give the U.S. a powerful advantage over the Soviets in the post-war world. And if the bomb hadn't been used, the project would have been seen as a gigantic waste of money and wartime resources. So, three, I guess, okay reasons. But some scientists who worked on the project had their doubts about using it, as well as military leaders and civilian policymakers. There was a petition among scientists who helped make the bomb, was set up to protest its use on its basis of morality. We're just going to drop a bomb and not consider the civilians living there. Some suggested to stage it on a desolate island near Japan to convince Japan of its surrender. Eisenhower, the general, right? General Eisenhower argued that Japan was already on the verge of surrender, saying dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary to save American lives. Use it or lose it. So Truman did not hesitate and was committed to fulfilling Roosevelt's legacy. During the war, FDR's fundamental strategy test question was to commit the vast industrial and technological resources of the U.S. to achieve total victory with the lowest cost in American lives. In Truman's estimation, the bomb was a way to achieve this goal, as he believed it would bring about an end to the war in the Pacific without sacrificing lives in an Allied invasion. A day after Truman ordered the military to prepare the dropping of the bomb, the U.S. and other allies warned Japan that it faced prompt and utter destruction unless it surrendered. Japan saw the DM and left us on red. This is a quote from Truman. The final decision of where and when to use the atomic bomb was up to me. Let there be no mistake about it. I regarded the bomb as a military weapon and never had any doubt that it should be used. So, test question: on August 6th, the B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, released the atomic bomb codenamed Little Boy over Hiroshima. 43 seconds later, every building collapsed under the explosion and Hiroshima ceased to exist. Japanese leaders hesitated to surrender. Without any word, 3 days later, a second bomb, test question, named Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki. An estimated 200,000 people had died due to injuries and radiation poisoning. After the fact, Emperor Hirohito was horrified by the destruction brought by the bombs. He ordered the Japanese leaders to draw up papers for surrender. So September 2nd, 1945, a formal surrender ceremonies took place on the battleship, the USS Missouri, and the entire world was quietly at peace. So there's Tokyo, there's Hiroshima, there's Nagasaki. There you go. There's more pictures. Little boy, fat man. Here are the pilots of the Enola Gay. That is Hiroshima's mushroom cloud. That's destruction after Hiroshima. That is Nagasaki's mushroom cloud. And here are the formal surrenders. Surrendering payments. And there's that picture, that famous picture. Japan gives up, accepts Allied terms. All right, what's your superpower? So in the fall of 1943, Secretary of State Cordell Hull began working with other Allied leaders on a declaration of the intent to form an international organization based on the equality of nations. At Yalta, the Big Three declared their intention to establish a general international organization to maintain peace and security. April 25th, 1945, representatives of 50 nations met in San Francisco to establish this new peacekeeping body called the United Nations. Test question. One of the UN's first actions was to commission a document declaring the fundamental and equal rights of all human beings, chartered by the one, the only Eleanor Roosevelt. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted in the UN's General Assembly in December 1948. Even though it's a union of many nations, following World War II came to be dominated by two, the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Years following the war, tensions between the two will rise and their conflicts crept into international debates. The UN promoted peace, but it soon became a place where the superpowers competed to spread their influence. There's the UN. Hot damn Potsdam. So tension between the Soviet Union and the U.S. had arisen before the end of World War II. July 1945, Allied leaders came together for a final wartime conference. There was a new big three. Clement Attlee from the UK, because Churchill's political party lost in the previous election. So Churchill started at the conference and later had to be replaced because Clement Attlee's party won. Harry Truman also replaced FDR, as we know, and Joseph Stalin is still in power. At Yalta, remember, Stalin promised that he would allow free elections, that is, a vote by secret ballot in a multi-party system. In Poland and other Eastern European parts where the Soviet Union had occupied. But by the time of the conference, it was clear Stalin wasn't keeping any of his promises. The Soviets prevented free elections in Poland and banned democratic parties, which convinced Truman that he and Stalin were deeply at odds. So now Truman's goal was demanding free elections to spread democracy to nations that had been under Nazi rule. Despite the conflict over Poland, most of the discussion at Potsdam had been how to deal with Germany after the war. At Yalta, the Soviets wanted to take reparations from Germany, and at Potsdam, Truman will object to that. He feared that crippling reparations would backfire. Look at World War I, for example, that paved the way for the Nazi Party. After hard bargaining, the leaders reached a compromise. Test question. They agreed to divide Germany into 4 occupation zones: the US, France, Britain, and the Soviet Union. And each country would take reparations from their own zones. And the German naval and merchant fleet would to be divided among Great Britain, US, and Soviet Union. So, Clement Attlee is this guy, Harry Truman in the middle, Stalin, got that gray hair. So this is how Germany is divided. Okay, you have green being Britain, blue France, orange the United States, red Soviet Union. And if you notice, the capital of Berlin is in the Soviet Union's backyard. And a lot of problems are going to come because of this. All right, the Berg. So besides the geographic division, Germany had another price to pay for its part in the war. The discovery of Hitler's death camps led to Allies putting 24 surviving Nazi leaders on trial. They were charged with crimes against humanity, crimes against the peace, and war crimes. At the Nuremberg trials, defendants included Hitler's most trusted party officials, government ministers, military leaders, and powerful industrialists. Test question Nuremberg trials. Each defendant was accused of one or the more following crimes. Crimes against the peace, where Germany planned and waged an aggressive war against other countries. War crimes, of course. The Germans performed acts against the customs of warfare, like stealing private property, destroying towns and cities, and killing hostages and prisoners, which violated the Geneva Conventions, and which were, guaranteeing prisoners' rights after World War I. And crimes against humanity. During the Holocaust, the Germans attempted the murder, extermination, deportation, or enslavement of civilians. In the end, 12 out of 24 were sentenced to death, and the remainder were sent to prison, I'm assuming for life. In later trials of lesser leaders, nearly 200 more Nazis were found guilty of war crimes. Some, however, argue these trials didn't go far enough, as many Nazis who took part in the Holocaust went free in the end. But an important principle is taken from the trials. Individuals are responsible for their own actions, even in times of war. The Nazis' executions could not escape punishment by claiming they were just following orders. And this principle became a part of international law. So if you want to be that way, you're going to have to pay for the crime later in life. So here are pictures of the 24 Nazis. Another picture. All right, Japanese occupied. So following its surrender, Japan was occupied by U.S. forces under the command of General Douglas MacArthur. In the early years, more than 1,100 Japanese, from former Prime Minister Hideki Tojo to lowly prison guards, were arrested and put on trial. 7, including Tojo, were sentenced to death. A lot of people couldn't be found. So In other countries, the Philippines, China, and various other battlegrounds, the Japanese officials were also tried. During the occupation, MacArthur will reshape Japan's economy by introducing free market practices that led to a remarkable Japanese recovery. MacArthur will also attempt to transform Japan's government by introducing a new constitution that would provide women's suffrage and guaranteeing basic freedoms and lowering the exalted emperor to being just, the human leader. And it's still called to this day the MacArthur Constitution in Japan. More on this later. So Japan was supposed to be occupied by these four, and in the end, it was only occupied by the U.S. Watch that video. That's Hideki Chojo on trial. Here's some Japanese officials on trial. All right, changes at home. So World War II was a time of opportunity for millions of Americans. Jobs abounded and despite rationing and shortages, people had money to spend. And at the end of the war, the country emerged as the world's dominant economic and military power. The war years were good years for working people. As defense industries boomed, unemployment fell to a low of 1.2% in 1944. Amidst price and wage controls, the average weekly pay rose 10% during the war. Farmers also prospered during the war due to good weather for growing crops in the early 40s. Farmers benefited from new improvements in farm machinery and fertilizers, reaping the benefits from higher crop prices. Output increased 50% and farm labor tripled. Women also enjoyed employment gains during the war, although most of them lost their job after the men returned home from the war. Over 6 million women joined the workforce, and as many as 1/3 of those worked in defense plants. And in defense industries, they got higher pay for the dangerous job. They also took advantage of getting involved in journalism and other professions. In the years that followed, many women fought to regain the rights that they had enjoyed during the war. They wanted the same opportunities available to men, such as better access to jobs and education. In addition to the economy, the war triggered one of the greatest mass migrations in American history. American families who typically lived for decades in one place suddenly uprooted themselves to seek work elsewhere. Men and women left farms and small towns to take jobs in shipyards and steel mills and aircraft plants across the country. Among the most eager migrants during the war were the African Americans. They looked for new jobs and an escape from discrimination. Hundreds of thousands of African Americans left the South for cities in the North and the West. In 1944, to help millions of new veterans ease back into civilian life, Congress passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, aka the GI Bill of Rights, that will provide education and training for veterans paid for by the federal government. So here's the second Great Migration. African Americans leaving, going north and now west. More so west. There's FDR, rest in peace, signing the GI Bill of Rights. And that's it. Well, that concludes where's my video? There we go. All right, so that concludes World War II. We are done. So get ready for your test. Your homework is page 567, 4 through 7. 5, 6, 7, 4, 5, 6, and 7. All right. I know it's been a long time, a long journey, but hopefully you guys did enjoy that. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.